Roger Williams University is hosting a crisis management seminar on May 3rd at their Providence campus. Crises, whether a natural disaster, cyber attack, or financial instability, can have severe repercussions if not handled properly. This is where crisis management plays a pivotal role. Join Roger Williams MBA students and expert speakers to learn how to prepare for the unexpected. The program is totally free and open to the public. You can register online at rwu.edu/events/crisis-management-symposium.
This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
The legalization of recreational cannabis that went into effect last year can open doors for your career. If you are already in the industry or wondering what is the best path to break into the cannabis field, well, the University of Rhode Island has a program to help you become highly competitive in numerous areas of the cannabis industry. Fully accredited by URI's College of Pharmacy, the certificate program is 100% online, and it can be completed in 2 semesters. The next application deadline for the summer 2023 session is April 4th, and courses start on May 9th. You can learn more at uri.edu/online/cannabis or give them a call at 401-874-5280. So tonight is the State of the Union. And look, I mean, much like the State of the State, which I talked about here on the podcast in terms of Rhode Island's State of the State a couple of weeks ago, a lot of it is just political theater. I mean, let's be honest about it. You've got everyone packed into the chamber and the big grand entrances, and there's somewhat of a fashion element to it, and who's sitting with who and who hates who and who loves who. And, all of that is at play. But there's also, it's really important because it lays out an agenda. And I think this year, especially for President Biden, we're looking at a scenario where he's facing an opposition party that's in control of the House chamber, and in presenting particularly some of his economic goals, that's going to require, a different mode for President Biden. So to break all of this down with us is the one, the only Emily Lynch, professor at the University of Rhode Island in the political science department. And we go way back.
We do.
Back. We were sitting in political science classes together at URI way back when, and now you've made it big time. You run the world of political science in many ways, in my mind.
Cool. Thank you, Bill. Thank you for that kind introduction. Much appreciated. But thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about the State of the Union address with you.
What do you think the big thing to watch for is tonight?
Whew, okay. Well, I think maybe we should be looking at messages about bipartisanship. And that is something that is not uncommon in State of the Union addresses. There was some research by the Congressional Research Service that said that one of the common themes of most State of the Union addresses is bipartisanship. So especially as Biden faces a Republican majority in the House, I believe we will see him trying to essentially reach across the aisle.
It makes sense. And it's at a time where, look, the American public, I haven't actually seen polling data on this, so it is just kind of winging it. But, my instinct is that there's going to always be, there's people who are entrenched in their camps, and you hear it on any issue. I mean, take the balloon over the last couple of days here,
right? Where
it's like, Biden's he's incompetent. He should have shot it down, over Montana or whatever it is. And then there's the Biden defenders who say, no, he should, do exactly what his generals say. And then there's other people that really just say, look, I don't really know. It's an intelligence thing. It's probably mostly classified information. I don't really know. But I sense more people are moving into a point where either they're indifferent or they want to see action. And that's what, if anything, that the Biden doctrine may end up, when we look back on it, the question will be, is he able to get things done? And he's at a point now that is very critical in terms of getting things done.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, you bring up some really important points. And I think the key point here that you mentioned is that this level of polarization has affected how individuals perceive current events, such as like the spy balloon, right? That we hear Republicans, Democrats with any issue that's on the table, really interpreting it based on their party and what the party is, what their messaging is. So I think that's definitely something no matter what Biden says, you're going to have different interpretations of what his, what were the positive aspects of his speech and what were those negative aspects.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that if we look at last year, for instance, and I think this is going to be a big part of his speech, is that, he's going to claim credit for some of this bipartisan legislation that got through, right? And I know it worked because Democrats had the majority in the House and the Senate. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to see some of this legislation in the next couple of years, especially as we look to 2024, right? And the presidential election.
Absolutely. And, one of the big things right now is that in the New York Times today, that the headline, Biden to lay down economic challenge to House Republicans. In his first State of the Union address since the GOP took the lower chamber, the president will call for higher taxes on the wealthy and more social aid to the needy. So right there, I mean, that's an obvious divide. That's an obvious sort of age-old, as long as there's been the modern Republican and Democratic parties, this divide of like, all right, who pays their quote unquote fair share and how much do we help the needy and who counts and qualifies as needy? Does that mean anybody who has student loan debt? Does that mean anybody who makes under $100,000? I mean, does it mean people who are unhoused? So all that definition work is going to have to eventually be figured out. But I mean, it'll be interesting just to see the applause. And, does anybody act like a fool like last year, like some of the alt-right members of the chamber, in terms of booing or shouting down the president and these types of issues, which I think most people would agree, if you just went out and did generic polling, and it's certainly been done over the years, most people agree that, yeah, the wealthy should pay their fair share and a healthy society helps those in need. But how much?
Right. I mean, that's the issue when we look at public opinion polls of, everybody's in agreement. Yeah, a lot of people say we should lower taxes, right? That's a lot of people would say that in polls, but then they also want better education, more funding for education, right? Better roads. So that's the issue, is that you have to play that game of give and take, right? And that's not always clear, and everybody has different agendas and different priorities and different values, right? So I think it goes back to, again, like what I said earlier, of how are these parties framing these issues and what's most important.
What about Russia, Ukraine? Where does that fit into all of this?
Yeah, I think that's going to get brought up. This was a big part of Biden's speech last year. I believe there was, I think this morning, you have guests. You have the ambassador of Ukraine who will be there. So I definitely think everybody should be paying attention and listening to how Biden talks about Ukraine and support for Ukrainians, and as well as China too. I think because of this recent publicity about the spy balloon, I think we should pay attention to what he has to say, because I think there's that expectation that he needs to discuss that, and national security will probably be a big part of his speech. But I think it's interesting how we're focusing on the spy balloon, and even like on WPRO, Mark Janast was discussing how, maybe the focus should be more on like TikTok, right? That this is, there are other parts of, the national security that we should be thinking about besides the spy balloon.
Yeah, that's for sure. He kind of said that he did say that on both Friday and yesterday on the Dan York show with us, and basically said, look, this is just part of the day-to-day spying that takes place and has taken place for a long time. I'm reminded of the axis of evil, George W. Bush, where Iran, Iraq, and North Korea, are supposedly going to, they're very close to, coming over and bombing the U.S. and overthrowing the free world as we know it. Of course, there's a lot of truth to the national security aspects of, and there was, in dealing with at least Iran and North Korea. Certainly, you can make an argument, not Iraq, as we look back on it. But, ramping up the rhetoric of, hey, our enemies, Russia, China, North Korea, whoever it may be, whoever you want to put into that alliance, how much do you think Biden will ramp that up versus try to tamper it down, given that unlike North Korea and Iran, we're talking about two nuclear superpowers who at least at minimum seem to have military capability that in an offensive context can be quite destructive if we push the button too far.
Right. No, I mean, I'm not a foreign policy expert. That is not my area, international relations. So, but I think that if we look in the context, like you were mentioning, of like Iraq and public opinion and how we have political leaders, that if they can have one message, and if elites buy into it, and if both Republicans and Democrats are kind of on the same page, then that's more powerful. But if we start seeing, like we did see in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, that there was a break, that convergence changed, then you're not going to have like Republicans, Democrats on the same page. So I think it'll be interesting to pay attention to that. But I definitely think that, national security will be a discussion, but there are other issues that Biden is going to cover. I think that one thing too, we have to keep in mind is, I'm kind of going to go back to kind of like the maybe, the intro to American politics, kind of what is the State of the Union address. And this is one of the constitutional powers that Biden has. It's explicitly within Article 2, right? So he has a powerful ability as the president to, he has this, this bully pulpit where you don't have any other leader in the United States that has this ability, right? Besides the president, to say this speech today, and you have all of the representatives, all the branches in one place. And he is able to discuss what he thinks is most important and highlight what he's done, that we should be paying, that we should appreciate, right? He's going to take that credit for all of that bipartisan legislation.
This obviously won't be the official or formal announcement of his campaign, but I think a lot of people will see it as that. If in fact, and it certainly seems like he's going to run, Commerce Secretary Raimondo gave him a pretty solid endorsement on a local news station here over the weekend. And, it just seems like all things point to a Biden rerun, the Democratic Party trying to shape the pathway of primaries in a way that would basically make it impossible to challenge him. The vice president doesn't seem to have a great bit of momentum now, a pretty negative piece in the New York Times. Pete Buttigieg is, he's not being viewed in the type of light that I think a lot of people expected him to be. So Biden seems like the guy, and he needs to lay it out tonight in a way that convinces more people that he is the guy. I mean, again, you'll never convince some of these people that are just like, totally anti-Biden. But the rest of us who are just assessing things from a somewhat neutral standpoint, we want to hear what he's accomplished and where he wants to go. What's his grand vision?
Exactly. And I think that something that we will need to also pay attention to is what the Republican response is, and kind of going into like what you're just mentioning, where we have an 80-year-old president, right? I think age, and then you have the contrast of Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who's younger, and obviously, so you have the age contrast, but you also have the blatantly different ideologies. So, but I think that is something that the Democratic Party is going to have to handle in assessing and dealing with what that seems to be one of the main complaints, right? So you have a president, if he's reelected till he's 86, right? So, so I think this is something that the Democratic Party also, like when we're thinking back to the last presidential election, Biden was seen and perceived as being, the safe candidate, the candidate that could beat Trump. And you're right, I don't see any other Democratic leaders that are kind of stepping up. Maybe Gavin Newsom from California, the governor of California. So that may be a potential name. But yeah, I think it sounds like, based on what we've, what the pundits and others are talking about, that there may be an announcement in the spring that Biden is going to be up for re-election.
Definitely. I think the only other name that really pops up is Marianne Williamson, the author and spiritual leader and activist, and, how much momentum can she really get going up against the machine? It's like, we've seen this movie play out before. And even with someone with the momentum of Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders, you saw on Super Tuesday what happened. The party said, yeah, you know what? We don't need you. We don't need this. We know we have an operation that can win. Even without the will of the people behind it, and the consolidation around Biden, basically just made it impossible for Sanders or anybody else to have a path to victory.
Right. Even with one of the most diverse group of primary candidates in the Democratic Party that we've ever seen, right? That still that Biden prevailed.
What do you think, in terms of like just even your students? Are people excited about national politics right now? There's so much that's gone into activism, whether it be from a social justice standpoint and a wide array of conversations, to practical, almost self-activism in a way with housing prices and, things of that sort, and just sort of a shift into a new type of energy that's out there. Does anybody care what President Biden says tonight, do you think, or are they more interested in the commercials that'll air before and after the speech?
Right. Yeah. So we have that concern of like the commercials. I think that we'll hear a lot about the guests who are, that's who people may remember versus what right. The messages of Biden. But it'll be a test. I'll ask my students this week, and to see how many students actually paid attention and watched it, or even knew it was happening tonight. And, but I do think that the students are interested, especially in issues related to criminal justice and environmental justice and environmental issues. I see students really caring about those issues. But I think they're still dealing with, the post-COVID effects of they have a lot going on. A lot of my students are working besides going to school. And so, they have a lot of demands. And I try to, I recommend them to go to their local and national media that is reputable, and to pay attention, and how important it is that they should be paying attention to these issues that may not seem relevant now, but they are, and they will be as they, once they graduate too.
Last question here. And again, appreciate very much making the time this morning here. Not last minute. I mean, it's not like I was like 5:30 this morning, do you want to do it? But, wasn't planned for months or anything like that. So I appreciate it. From your standpoint as a political scientist, as somebody who looks at things from, you're not part of the inside baseball. You're not somebody who works for, the Biden administration and then worked for an administration and then went into the field. You really are in a unique position where you can assess this stuff in the context of a historical timeline, in the context of understanding students' perspective, other academics' perspective. You're a member of the media now. You're on a lively experiment on PBS. And, from your standpoint, what is this moment in American politics all about? What do you think people look back on and say, you can think back to, for me, kind of George H.W. Bush, but certainly Clinton, Bush, Obama, obviously, and Trump. And there's a vibe, there's a memory that comes with it. How important is tonight's speech to establishing Biden's doctrine, vibe, how it will be remembered, and what do you make of all that?
I mean, that's a really good question. I think that the State of the Union address is this one, important, you have this speech each year in which he can lay out what his legislative priorities are. And they will be assessed based on how departments, agencies, Congress, the public, how they react to what his plans are, and if they will indeed give him support behind some of these priorities. And I think it's going to affect 2024 and what his messaging will be as he, makes this decision. And it seems to, what we perceive that he will be running again in 2024, at least his party, setting up his party for success. I think it's also we're talking about an economy that looks like it's rebounding. I think that might be another theme of Biden in this speech to pay attention to. And, there's a lot of discussion of a recession, and which very well we could still see that, but there are some indications, economic indicators, that's just otherwise. The debt ceiling. So I'm throwing a lot out there. I know that you wanted me to give you this one.
Bring it on. Give us all of it.
So I think that his economic message is going to be important too, and set him up for success as well, up to what is going to happen with these debt ceiling talks with Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House. So I think that reflecting on COVID and getting us through, get through COVID too, is something that defines this time, right? Yeah. And that's the lens in which we're perceiving a lot of these current events, these issues.
Yeah, no question about it. Professor Emily Lynch, University of Rhode Island, Political Science Department. Hey, this was fun. I think we should do it again.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for having me.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.